All right, welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're cracking open a medical case file on a condition that's way more common than you might think, but it often stays hidden for decades. It's called hemochromatosis, and we're about to get right into it.
I mean, just think about that for a second. It's a really weird idea, right? We all know we need iron to live. It's what carries oxygen in our blood. But what if, for some people, that very same essential element just builds up to toxic levels with absolutely nowhere to go? Well, that's the strange paradox we're going to unravel today.
So, here's our game plan. First, we'll tackle the basic iron problem. Then, we'll get into the two main ways this happens. After that, we'll hunt for the warning signs, see how docs nail down a diagnosis, and finally, we'll cover the treatments and the big takeaways you need to know.
Okay, let's start at the beginning, the iron problem. We're going to get to the bottom of why too much of a good thing is a really, really bad thing here.
So here's the absolute core of it. Our bodies are amazing, but they have a weird blind spot. Unlike a lot of other stuff, we don't have a good natural system for getting rid of extra iron. The only real way out is through blood loss. So when your body absorbs too much, it has no choice but to start storing it. And it piles up in critical places like your liver, your heart, and your pancreas, just slowly causing damage over time.
And this really shows you how sneaky this condition is. Symptoms usually don't even start to pop up until more than 20 grams of iron have already built up in the body. This can take decades. It often doesn't show its face until someone is in their 40s, 50s, or even later.
So you're probably wondering, how does this iron overload even happen? Yeah, it's not random. As we're about to see, there are really two very different paths that can lead you to hemochromatosis. And it's really interesting to see this split. On one hand, you've got the primary, or hereditary version. This is basically a genetic typo, where your body's own system for absorbing iron just gets stuck in overdrive. And believe it or not, it's one of the most common genetic diseases out there for people with Northern European roots. Then, on the other hand, you have the secondary form. This one is acquired. It's not about your gut absorbing too much. It's about iron being put directly into your body, usually from something like repeated blood transfusions for another medical issue. So let's trace that genetic pathway failure step by step. It all kicks off with that faulty HFE gene. Think of it as a mistake in the blueprint. That mistake leads to low levels of this super important hormone called hepcidin, which is basically the body's iron gatekeeper. Now, when the gatekeeper isn't doing its job, another protein, ferroportin, just leaves the gates wide open. It just keeps pumping way, way too much iron from the food you eat right into your bloodstream, completely flooding the whole system. So if all this iron is quietly building up for years, how in the world would you even know it's there? Well, let's take a look at the body's warning signals, which are often super subtle and very, very delayed. Now, this number is just staggering, 75%. 3/4 of all patients have zero symptoms when they get diagnosed. The discovery is usually a total accident, something that just pops up on routine blood work for a completely different reason. This thing really does hide in plain sight. Now, for the people who do get symptoms, this is the classic trio that doctors learn to look for. First, iron builds up in the liver, leading to liver disease and a much higher risk of liver cancer. Then, iron gets into the pancreas and messes with insulin production, which causes diabetes. And finally, iron deposits in the skin can cause this very distinct bronze-looking tan. And yeah, you put those last two things together, the bronze skin and the diabetes, and you get the condition's very famous, if kind of grim nickname, bronze diabetes. It just perfectly captures two of its most visible effects. Okay, now here is a fantastic clinical pearl. This is a real insider clue for doctors. The single most specific telltale sign is a very particular kind of joint pain. It's what they call symmetrical arthropathy of the second and third MCP joints. All that means is joint pain on both sides of the body, specifically in the knuckles of your index and middle fingers. When a doctor sees that, hemochromatosis shoots right to the top of their list of possibilities.
So, you've got the clues, maybe you've got some suspicion. How do you go from maybe to a definite diagnosis? Well, it all comes down to the lab work.
These are the two big ones they look for in a blood test. First, high levels of ferritin, that's the protein your body uses to store iron. The cutoff is a little different for premenopausal women since they lose iron through menstruation. Second, they check something called transferrin saturation, which is basically a measure of how much iron is actively being shuffled around in your blood. And this number right here is the critical one. A transferrin saturation of 45% or higher, that's a major red flag. You can think of transferrin as the little buses carrying iron around your body.
A number this high means that all those buses are almost completely full, which is a huge sign that the whole system is overloaded. But here's the flip side, and this is just as important. If your ferritin and your transferrin saturation levels are both normal, there's a 97% chance you do not have hereditary hemochromatosis. So these tests are incredibly good at ruling the disease out, which is super helpful. So once the blood work is pointing strongly towards iron overload, the final confirmation usually comes from a genetic test to find that faulty HFE gene. In some trickier cases, a doctor might use an MRI to estimate just how much iron is in the liver, or they might even do a liver biopsy to get a direct look.
Okay, let's bring this all home with the most important part, right? What can you actually do about it, and what are the key things you really need to remember from all this?
You know, the main treatment for the hereditary form is surprisingly simple, almost old school. It's called therapeutic phlebotomy, which is just a fancy way of saying they remove blood on a regular schedule, kind of like a prescribed blood donation. By taking out blood, you are literally taking iron right out of the body. The backup plan, which is used more for the secondary type, is chelation therapy. That involves using medicines that bind to the iron so your body can get rid of it. Lifestyle changes are also absolutely huge. Patients are always told to avoid two key things: alcohol and vitamin C supplements. And you might be wondering why. Well, it turns out both of them actually make your body absorb more iron from food, which can speed up the exact organ damage that you're trying so hard to prevent.
And this quote from our source material, it just says it all, doesn't it? The outcome of this disease is all about timing. If you catch hemochromatosis early, really simple treatments can prevent a whole world of misery. But if it's missed, the consequences are incredibly severe. We're talking irreversible organ damage in a much shorter life. So we'll leave you with this final question, knowing that the most common form of this is genetic and that it's often totally silent for decades. It really makes you think, doesn't it? It just underscores how important it can be to know your family's medical history. A simple blood test could really be the key to stopping a serious but totally manageable disease in its tracks. Thanks for joining us.